There was one lady that was watching our balalaika brothers,
Uh-huh.
musicians from Russia and Ukraine playing, and she had her walker and she was standing, and all of a sudden she pushed the walker away and she started dancing. She really enjoyed it, and everybody was watching like, oh my gosh, but she was like lifting her skirt and twirling
Uh,
and dancing. And when the song ended, it's like something happened, and then she returned her walker and started walking away.
Hi, Suhail. Thank you so much for joining the Are You Happy podcast. To get us started, could you just introduce yourself, describing the organization mission of celebrating shared humanity through global arts, and tell us a bit about your role also.
Yes. I work with Musical Bridges Around the World. We're a nonprofit performing arts company based in San Antonio, Texas, founded by a pianist from the Soviet Union back in the late 90s at the invitation of the rector of the cathedral, who had just returned from Europe and seen great houses of worship activated by chamber music. And so she came back and was invited into the space, and that's how the organization began. And now we bring some of the greatest artists from around the world, Grammy Award-winning Van Cliburn, Tchaikovsky artist, folk, jazz, classical, chamber music, and we believe that great art should be accessible to all, so it's all free to the public.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, since MBAW brings world-class artists to perform free concerts at the venues like the San Fernando Cathedral, and how do these events foster connection across cultural and socioeconomic lines?
Well, San Antonio is actually one of the largest poor cities in the nation, and our board mandated years ago that in order to lower that barrier for access, that we need to make our public programming free.
Hmm.
So when you come to these concerts, you see people from all walks of life, to our highest level patron donors, to parishioners that stay after Mass, sometimes school students that are coming for school credit, downtown residents, visitors, and then sometimes the unhoused, homeless people that wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity to be inspired by such greatness because even a small cost of a ticket would be unattainable. Bringing these different cultures, we try to challenge people's stereotypes. Less than 47% of Americans have passports, which
Hmm.
means most of our fellow citizens and countrymen have not traveled outside the world. And what they
Yeah.
know about the outside world tends to come through news media, which has a tendency to focus on conflict, on negativity, on violence. And so we aim to challenge and shatter those stereotypes. For example, we've had an Israeli-Palestinian piano duo play together.
Mhm. Is
We've
that
had an,
difficult by your side to gather all these people and all the organization and creating the event and everything?
it
Is it
is, it's a lot of
hard?
work. We
Yeah.
have eight full-time staff and we work on a very nimble budget, but we have
Hmm.
130 plus events per year. In
Wow.
addition to our main stage series, we have an international piano competition,
Hmm.
a international music festival. We have concerts in the schools where we use arts as a vehicle to teach STEM core curricula. We go to the seniors. We're in the Soldier Recovery Unit. San Antonio is a big military city. So through these many arms of programming, we access, we bring the music to the people.
Yeah.
And it's interesting when you have these disparate artists that people think they're fighting. That's what I hear in the news. How could they be
Hmm.
sitting down at the instruments and making music together, much less speaking? And then they recognize after the concert that, in fact, music is this universal language that transcends socioeconomics and politics and
Hmm.
religion, and it unites us. And we've had an Armenian visual artist with a Syrian clarinetist, the St. Petersburg String Quartet from Russia with a Ukrainian singer. We bring in Persian artists. And so
Hmm.
it just highlights these parts of the world that are sometimes really just being blasted in the media. And that's very important for us to be the first line of exposure, especially to
Yeah,
children.
very important for everyone actually. Programs like Musical Sprouts bring cultural and social emotional learning into classrooms. So can you share a story that captures this impact on kids?
Sure. Initially, when the program started, we thought we would share these great world-class artists with the schools because the first thing to be cut in schools is arts. When budgets go down, that's what
Uh-huh.
disappears. And then the administrators and the teachers were like, this is great, but we have to make time for this, but we have to focus on this test. And we don't have
Hmm.
time for these extra concerts. We would gather the children in the gymnasium, in the cafeteria, in the auditorium, wherever the largest space was, so
Yeah.
the whole school could gather for the arts. So what we did is we actually started to pair with the curriculum. We got writers who work in the Department of Education at the University of Texas here and looked at how we can use arts as a vehicle for learning core curriculum. For example, a child who sees a mathematics equation on a page, when they hear music in 3/4 time, like percussion, that's a
Mhm.
fraction. They
Yeah.
might not grasp that initially, but that's mathematics.
Mhm.
The same thing with Bernoulli's equation, wind moving through a trumpet or a horn. Well, that's Bernoulli's. They're learning physics, but they're learning it in a way that is not necessarily academic off a black and white textbook page, but in a
Mhm.
very holistic manner. And so what we found is that their learning outcomes increase, their retention is better, and the teachers love teaching this way, and the kids are more receptive because everyone learns in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah.
When we bring these incredibly diverse cultures to the schools, we have one school in our District 8 of San Antonio called Colonies North, where a lot of refugees end up settling. And there are kids that come from 34 different languages that they're speaking in that school.
Wow.
And one time we had Kiran Azme, who's our Syrian clarinetist, play. And afterwards, this little girl came up to him and said, "Thank you for sharing my music with my friends." She was a Syrian refugee. And
Mhm.
where would she be able to hear this type of music and tell her friends, like, this is where I come from? And
Yeah.
this is how I
Exactly.
listen to my music. So it's this opportunity to create this social fabric and this universal connector for us through the arts.
About the community engagement, Unity Fest merges classical, folk, and contemporary music traditions. Like, how do these collaborations strengthen the community brand?
San Antonio, Texas is sort of a confluence of cultures. We're 67% Hispanic, but at the same time, we've had generations of German influence, of Czech,
Mhm.
more recent years of Asian, in addition to people here say, we never crossed the border crossed us. That's how long, in terms of generational Mexicans, have been here. And so to bring these people together and highlight different art forms that have come out. We're very strong in conjunto and Tejano music, which is rich in the culture here. But again, that international component, we use the International Music Festival, Unity Fest, that happens every 4 years. And the next one is coming up in 2026, which happens to coincide with our semi-quincentennial as a nation, America's
Mhm.
250th birthday. So we're partnering with this celebration to highlight the heritage of the peoples of this area as well as beyond, and everything from Irish to German to Native American. And it's going to be an incredible festival because it's free. We have people from all walks of life bringing their communities, bringing their children, their neighbors, people traveling to see these musicians from all over. And in these spaces, people trust the brand of musical bridges. So sometimes they don't even know what they're coming to. They just know that it's going to be accessible and interesting. And they get exposed to something very unique and different. And one of the interesting things about the city and programming here is that because there's not necessarily a strong classical education in Western music, like there might be in Western Europe, I was just in Vienna. So people don't have that exposure of what the canon is.
Mhm.
And so the artists could play things that's out of their repertoire, very dynamic or interesting or unusual and contemporary. And then the artistic director and our coordinator work very closely with them to choose pieces where they're going to do something pretty different. You might have a
Mhm.
classical quartet with a singer that they've never worked with before.
Yeah.
So we're also bringing musicians together in addition to bringing people from all walks of life. And oftentimes, the music world around the world in these genres, sometimes people kind of know each other. So when they hear about the organization, they're like, "Yeah, it's not just a one-off performance because we get to go there to San Antonio, perform for the public, perform
Mhm.
for members, perform for the kids. We go to the seniors. They really get a sense of the community, and they share that around the world. And so they sort of become ambassadors of our community as well. So in
Yeah.
that way, we're both a social fabric locally and also international musical bridges.
The organization also brings arts to seniors through Golden Age initiatives. What reflections or feedbacks from older audience has stayed with you from the seniors?
It's really incredible. And the reason we do that is because, again, lowering that barrier to access. Even if you don't charge a ticket price, not everyone has the mobility to be able to come to the concert hall and attend. And so what we do is we take the artist straight to them. And it's really meaningful. For example, we've had a lady that came up to us after one of the performances. It was an opera singer, and Mana Galoyan, and she said, "Thank you for wiping the dust from my soul." And it was this really poignant moment. Turns out that lady herself was an opera singer. And in her advanced age, for many years, she had not been able to go to the opera. And to have that experience right there, it woke something in her. It created this magical connection and it brought tears to her eyes. And she was able to share that experience with her community there in the retirement center. So that's just one example. Sometimes these seniors that they're around in one building, they can be sedentary, they do have their crafts and activities, but they oftentimes use walkers. So we
Hmm.
actually have this captured on film. There was one lady that was watching our balalaika brothers,
Uh-huh.
musicians from Russia and Ukraine playing, and she had her walker and she was standing, and all of a sudden she pushed the walker away and she started dancing.
Oh,
And
wow.
once
She
the
must
song was
really
over,
enjoy that.
she really enjoyed it, and everybody was watching like, oh my gosh! But she was like lifting her skirt and twirling and
Uh,
dancing. And when the song ended, it's like something happened, and then she returned to her walker and started walking away. She had
so
this moment that the music moved
yeah,
her in the skirt and allowed
exactly.
her to dance. It was amazing.
Music brings her to life, like dancing and stuff like that. She really enjoyed that. But let's
Yeah.
just talk about the behind the scenes and the challenges that you have. One third of the budget comes from the grants, so the rest from the donation and memberships. What challenges arise from offering everything free to the public, and how do you sustain that since they are coming free?
It's honestly our biggest challenge. And we have operated for 27 years with this model of bringing great art to all and at no cost for the most part. So we partner with our city government, the city of San Antonio, as
Mm-hmm.
well as Texas Commission on the Arts and public entities, as well as foundations and corporate philanthropy, and as you mentioned, our membership series. But one of the big challenges is consistency. Because we have no earned revenue, and we have 8 full-time staff with an operational budget, then sometimes, for example, monies ebb and flow. We recently had cuts at the National Endowment for the Arts, which has a trickle effect to our other funders that need to shift their priorities to food and social services.
Community
Or,
values are really important.
you know, and so we are working now on a few different models to look at sustainability in the next quarter century. One of them is building an endowment. We hope to build that to 10 million so that a percentage of distribution of that can help
Mm-hmm.
support operations. We hope to have recurring grants that we match in our public sector. And we're also looking to establish a business, a for-profit business, where some of our members or members of the community become stakeholders and a portion of the profits
Yeah.
support sustainability of the organization. So
Yeah,
through
that's
these
really
different
good.
models, yeah, we'd hope to diversify the funding and be here for another quarter century for the
Yeah,
community.
exactly. So you bring in top tier global talent. How do you ensure that the world class performance quality while staying true to the community values? Since I mentioned the community values.
Right. So our artistic director and founder, Anya Gokrovsky, comes from Gnesin. She trained at the top conservatory in Moscow.
Mm-hmm.
And our artistic coordinator is a double doctorate from both Russia and the United States. So through their education and through their contacts, eventually first in Europe and then now around the world, we have developed a great network of artists. And
Mm-hmm.
over the years as well, growing that network, for example, with musicians from Yo-Yo Ma's Folklore Project and working with ECA at the State
Yeah.
Department, there are these multiple opportunities. And sometimes when we bring artists back because they work really well and we have different program ideas, they say, "Oh my gosh, we love what you do here. Here's an idea of somebody we work with that might be really interesting
Wow.
to you."
Yeah.
So through that, 2.5 decades, the network grows and we continue to bring really dynamic,
Yeah.
interesting visual and performing arts here to San Antonio. So it's very exciting. That's probably one of the most thrilling things is getting to spend time with these artists that come from around the world and they get to share their story. And in terms of the values, locally, we're trying to bring the world to San Antonio. Some of these kids, as we mentioned, they're not leaving their community, much less the city, state, or country. So to bring the world to them, they get to understand as their first exposure to, say,
Mm-hmm.
Syria or to Iran or to Israel and Palestine as artists, as something
Yeah.
beautiful, instead of what they might be bombarded with in the news media. So that's very important. And the culture of the community is very rich and very vibrant as a majority Hispanic culture, and it's very receptive. And again,
Mm-hmm.
we've created a brand that people trust. And so even if they're not familiar with the genre, the country, the artist, they know that it's going to be accessible. And our
Yeah.
concerts are typically 60 to 75 minutes. And no matter what it is, people are always entranced and interested in what's
hmm
happening.
They know the value of the organization also. They already know that you will choose the best one, so that's they don't have any doubt about that.
Right.
In your time with the MBAW, what's a performance or educational event or audience reaction that truly moved you? Like that you were like, wow, I need to do this because of this event or organization. I know that you have too many of them, but maybe you do have
Yeah.
something specific.
Yeah, we run an international piano competition, as I mentioned, and I'm kind of the master of ceremonies during the competition. So I get to interview the artists, and they come from around the world. We had 76 applicants from 21 nations that we whittled down to a final dozen that we fly here for a full week of 4 rounds of competition. Getting to hear their story backstage and interview them, and then seeing them excel and how that translates all the hard work, that's pretty remarkable. When we had our gold medalist last year, Young Young Guo from China, and it was just this absolutely exhilarating performance when she's playing with orchestra. We flew in the
hmm
Mexico City Philharmonic as our
hmm
partner from our friendship city under the baton of Scott Yu, who runs a great PBS show called Now Hear This. And his orchestra from Mexico City on stage, and the audience captive. And she's finishes her performances, and all three of the laureates from the last competition happen to be women from Russia, from China, and from Korea, and they were all fabulous. But seeing that moment when the jury comes out and awards the medal is pretty exciting. Another one I would say is part of the competition also is the third round. We have an opportunity for these classically trained pianists to improvise through a cadenza. And because they're classically trained, and these days, a lot of classical pianists sort of train in silos. They're not flexing their improvisational
hmm
muscles like the composers did in the old days, like Beethoven and Bach. So through this commissioned work, we force them to explore the music, and we put them with world musicians, which is again
hmm
sometimes outside of the comfort zone. And to see what they come up with is very exciting because in that third round, it's actually the audience award. So the jury is not judging the third round. Audience text to vote on who their favorite was. And the thing that distinguishes the three laureates is that cadenza, the improvised
hmm
piece. So that's really, really incredible. So yeah, as
Yeah.
you said, there's so
I
many
can I
performances and
can
many
see that
examples.
in your face by telling the stories and the case studies. You're very happy. I do know that these cases moved you and kept you in the organization, and that's really good. As someone coordinating global arts, how has your own worldview shifted from the cross-cultural experiences you have curated?
Absolutely. I was very fortunate. I have a big family. I have 52 first cousins on 5 continents.
Oh
So we
wow, really big family
really
there.
big family. And
Yeah.
I used to work in global development under the auspices of the United Nations Economic and Social Council. So we had projects in 35 countries.
hmm
I had a lot of exposure to global cultures and peoples. And so this was like a beautiful fit when I happened to come in to my hometown where I had not lived for 10 years in San Antonio and discover this organization and get to work with them. But every time that we have musicians from a new place or you hear about updates from stories of what's happening in their homeland, that it's a mind-opening experience. For our artistic director, I'll give you an example. As I mentioned, she came from Russia. She'd never seen a black person until she
Wow.
came to the United States.
Uh,
So then, when she started programming, the organization was traditionally, in the founding days, all classical. It was her Russian, Eastern European friends. And over the years, she's actually learned a lot herself. She never knew that, for example, my family comes from India, that Indian had a classical tradition. She
mhm.
thought everything that wasn't Western classical was folk.
Mhm. Yeah.
Indian classical music predates Western classical music by thousands of years,
Yeah. Exactly.
but it operates in a different way because
Yeah.
there are ragas and is improvisation built into the structure, sort of like jazz, different from Western classical music, but it's a classical tradition.
Mhm.
And so these types of experiences, even for people who are educated, well educated, it opens their mind and allows us to see how things operate in a different place in a different way and a very rich heritage and culture. And so we end up, embracing it and programming it and sharing it with the community.
About the future vision, what's upcoming programs or expansion goals are you most excited about? Whether the new concert series, partnerships, or educational offerings?
We open our 28th season this fall in
Mm-hmm.
October, but currently we have a very exciting partnership happening with the San Antonio Public Library, and we have over a dozen events happening at the library celebrating Indian culture. So, in addition to the musicians and the dancers that are there, we're actually doing cultural opportunities for kids to learn how to tie a turban and women to tie a sari. So, sort of demystifying things that they see that seem sort of exotic or otherworldly, bringing it right into the community libraries. Next year, as I mentioned, we have our Unity Fest with the 250th anniversary of the country. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really exciting. And then coming up in 2028, we have our international piano competition, the Gerwitz. We do that every 4 years. And in the first one, we had a famous basketball player from San Antonio known as the Admiral. David Robinson was our honorary chair. In 2024, we had Grammy award-winning singer Dionne Warwick, who was our honorary chair and gave a concert at that time. And we're working on our honorary chair for 2028, which is exciting too. So those are kind of the short and longer term goals that we have. And one of the things that we were asked to do recently, the interesting thing about Musical Bridges is that everything has been out of invitation from the community. As I mentioned in the founding of the organization, the rector, Father David, had come back
Mm-hmm.
from Europe and invited us into this space.
Yeah.
Then we were invited into the schools to share these artists with their culture, their geography, their social studies. And then we were invited to the seniors communities because they couldn't travel. And the piano competition actually existed called the San Antonio International Piano Competition. But in 2016, the aging retiring board asked us to take it over, and we took it over and took it to a global level. So all of these things have been very organic growth out of need in the community in San Antonio. And in the same way, very recently, we were approached by the military. San Antonio has a big military and veteran presence, and sometimes our soldiers come back injured, and the wounded warriors become isolated from society because they're damaged physically and psychologically. So we've
Mm-hmm.
been asked to provide music. And what we found is through drum circles and guitar lessons, they now have a mission again where they had given up on life because of their injuries. They now have purpose and they unite with the community, being able to create music together and experience this learning and gaining a new skill set. So that's a very, very powerful tool for social cohesion, community engagement, and it's something that we're looking forward to growing.
How many people can attend these events? Or it depends based on where the event is going to be held.
It does depend. We
Oh,
impact
okay.
over 30,000 people per year,
Mm-hmm.
and our largest constituency is really the school children, and
Mm-hmm.
those concerts are only for the school children. The things that we do in the public sector, like in the cathedral or in the concert halls, are for everyone.
Yeah.
When we go to the senior centers, it's just for those senior
Yeah.
centers. When
Yeah.
we go to
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
military, it's just for the people on base. So,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the venue and the location,
Yeah. Of
there are very
course.
specific programs. And we also have recently taken over a scholarship. And so now we can fund kids who are aspiring in their string instruments to go off and continue in higher studies. And we give them performance opportunities through the Youth Ambassador Program to engage with our seniors so that they
Mm-hmm.
get to practice and build their skills
Yeah.
and while having an audience. And it works two ways because the
Yeah.
seniors get programming.
Always. If our
Yeah.
listeners want to support through volunteering, attending events, or donating, what's the most meaningful first step that they can take?
Time, talent, and treasure, we always say. But the most meaningful thing is actually going to our website if they're not in San Antonio, MBAW.org, seeing what it is that we do, and following us on social media. We have a great YouTube channel as well as Facebook and Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do has now actually grown beyond San Antonio because during the pandemic, we thought not to cancel any concert contracts. Nobody was gathering. So we would hire film crews or have artists self record or live, and we would share those with our community through virtual concerts. When the pandemic ended and we resumed live programming, we thought this is such a great medium that we've been able to share these artists now around the world. And we continued to record, and now we have those concerts available on our online presence. So we invite those that are local or regional to attend our concerts. If you're interested in volunteering or serving on our board or committee, can contact us through the web portal. And of course, the biggest thing, of course, is contributing. And if people are able to make a contribution and donate, that helps us advance our mission and support our operations and all of our community engagement for these 30,000 folks in San Antonio and beyond.
Do you have any guiding quote or belief about shared humanity and the power of the music that inspires your work?
Yeah, it's what moves me because as divisive as things get sometimes in our world, this is a way that we can come back to ourselves and to each other. to share our common humanity. And to be
Mhm.
able to do that with my work is very powerful. And that's what keeps me grounded and loving what I do, to share the music with others.
So before we wrap up, this is the last question. What do you hope every listener remembers about the organization mission and impact?
I hope that you remember that no matter what you feel are the challenges in life, that art is a universal language and you can always come back to it. And that doesn't always mean that it's beautiful. Sometimes it can be tragic, sometimes it can be challenging, evoke emotions that include the greatest and the highest and the lowest, from tears to joy. But knowing that art is able to invoke that and it has a resonance with somebody that you might not share language or political view or religion
Mhm.
with, that they're impacted the same way, and that brings us together. It's a
Yeah,
common experience that art can give us.
exactly. So thank you so much, Suhail, for sharing your time and for bringing global music to unite and inspire your community. Thank you
Well,
again.
thank you very much for having me, and I appreciate being part of the program.
Thank you so much.